All right, happy Friday, everybody. See why my screen's not moving the slide. All right, happy Friday. This is Jennifer Lee. I'm here with my other two co-hosts, David Litton, Rakesh Gupta, and we're here for our 18th Automation Hour session. So for those of you who are new joining us for the first time, we do meet every other Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, and here are our upcoming sessions. In 2 weeks, we'll have Koti, and in June, we have 2 MVPs as well as a user group leader. And we are going to be looking for additional presenters shortly. So if you have a cool process automation use case and solution that you will like to present to the group, whether it's beginner, intermediate, advanced, submit your idea and we will reach out to you for a slot. So logistic-wise, all lines will be muted. Do use the questions feature to post any questions that you might have of Bonnie's presentation today or a process automation general question, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. We will post the recording via the usual channels, Twitter, Success Community afterwards, as well as our website. And any additional questions we don't get to, continue on with the discussion on our Salesforce Automation Hour Success Community. So I want to give a shout out to our sponsor. And here are your co-hosts. So with that, we are very excited to have Bonny here with us today as our guest presenter. Bonny is a fellow MVP and has spoken at numerous Salesforce events about flow. So Bonny, I want to thank you for taking your time to be with us today, and let me switch over presenter rights to you. All right, it should be all yours, Bonny.
Thanks. My unmute button had disappeared under my on-air showing screen menu. Sorry about that. The joys of technology. Thank you to everybody who's taking the time out on Cinco de Mayo to join us for the webinar. I'm really thrilled to see a lot of familiar names in the attendee list and some new folks as well. It's just excellent. And let's see, I'm a Salesforce MVP, as you mentioned. I've been a Rad coach. Rad is a program to help women who are interested in learning to code in Apex. And Jennifer, I think you were a student, were you not?
I was.
Okay. So hopefully you got a lot out of it. It's a really nice introductory course, and I'm also helping Pluralsight build out their library of courses for Salesforce, and my first course should be out in the next couple of weeks on using your existing Visualforce pages in the new Lightning experience. But today we are here to talk about flow and how to use flow to send out surveys and forms to customers or clients or contacts or constituents. So first I'll introduce to the business problem, and that is that we could be using the stay in touch form. Well, that's going away in summer 17, so goodbye stay in touch form. Most people weren't using it anyway, but because most people needed a richer kind of survey, not beyond just the, hey, is your address info up to date? So we wanted to look at how to use flow to have more flexibility in surveying directly to customers. Again, there are 3 different ways that you can do this with out-of-the-box features of Salesforce, Enterprise and above at least. Stay in touch, which is going away, web to case, which we will take a quick look at, and flow. which of course gives us that flexible multi-page forms, clicks, not code, or single-page forms that have logic behind them that help us enforce best practices and data integrity. So it's really a rich tool. In this particular scenario, it's also going to require a little bit of Visualforce to get it to do what we want it to do. So we're going to have a look at all the pieces involved there. First, a brief word about Stay in Touch. It's going away. It looked a little bit like this when you set up an email to send to your contacts, and you didn't really have any control over the fields that were available in it. It wasn't flexible at all. The recipient got something that looked a bit like this. The last time I sent myself one, it even had a broken image in it. So not to worry, it will be gone, Summer. So let's switch over to our demo and look at our existing opportunities, the ones that are going to stay with us. And I'm going to show you all of this in the Lightning experience because I'm ready to go all Lightning, or trying to be ready. Okay, the other sort of built-in feature that's available for creating forms to use on your company website or personal website or whatever is the web case HTML generator. And I wish I could see everybody's faces and hands because I would love to know if a lot of folks have HTML experience. In the past, when I've asked administrators this question, a lot of them actually do have HTML experience. So hopefully this won't be too obscure for you. The nice thing about Web to Case is that it gives you access to custom and standard fields on the case object. So you can set up that HTML form to really deliver the kind of information that you need from your website visitors. And of course, the website visitors don't have to be logged into Salesforce. They don't have to be community members. They don't have to log into your website. They just have to fill out the form. And the form is available to be generated automatically in Salesforce. When you click the button to generate it, you get your basic HTML code. Again, if you're familiar with HTML to any extent, then you've seen how tag-based languages work using these angle brackets. So you're not surprised to see the form opening up here and the form closing down here. That's our form for our website visitors to fill out. And we've also got information about where our particular instance is. In this case, it's a sandbox. We've got org ID information, which is supposed to be hidden, but that brings up an important point about the web to case HTML generator. The first important point is I've never had this generate code that I could use without at least some edits. For example, putting quotes around the word hidden here in these two lines for the input types. And then also, generally speaking, adding close slash here to the breaks is important. So, but the nice thing is that Salesforce generates this for you, and as an admin, you can have ultimate control over what fields, what custom fields, what standard fields on the case object or the lead object. There's a web to lead form as well. Works basically the same. You have ultimate control over what that form looks like, and you can change it pretty much on the fly. Well, sort of on the fly, because you've still got to generate the HTML, and if you're putting this on the website, that means you've probably got to get your website developer to incorporate that HTML code into the company website for you, and that can be time consuming. So maybe there's another way. And in fact, there is. You can actually put that HTML code into a Visualforce page, because ultimately Visualforce pages are just web pages. They're going to be served up like any web page, and so they support HTML code. You can see that I've added those quotes around the word hidden here. I've added those end marks in the break tag here. to make this actually work in my environment. And we can take a quick look at what that looks like. And it's really not very attractive. I haven't put any styling on it, but hey, I've got a web page that I can serve up from within Salesforce. Now, that's great, but right now this web page is only accessible to people who have logged into Salesforce. And I'd really like it to be available to people from my website. So maybe I can put a link on my website to the page, but how do I provide that link? How do I make that link accessible to people who aren't logged in? And that comes through the Force.com sites. Again, I wish I could get a show of hands for anybody that's currently using a Force.com sites or is familiar with Force.com sites. It's a really great feature that lets you serve up web pages from within Salesforce. And that content can be generated from the data in your database through Visualforce Pages. In this case, I'm serving up a Visualforce page that's going to have the flow that you see, but I could also use it to serve up through the site this web to case form. Well, except I haven't styled the web to case form, so I don't quite want to do that yet. Once we have the site set up, we add the Visualforce pages that we want to include. And that includes some error pages that Salesforce builds out for us automatically. And we have public access settings that we will talk about a little bit more later. But let's take a look at the flow that we're going to be sending. This is the basic sample form that we've got going. In this case, this is a form that I did for a nonprofit that wanted to be able to survey people who had gotten some career training so that they could continue to keep track of further work that the clients did down the road. And so they wanted to send out these basic keep in touch emails that had a form that would allow people to give them details about their continued work. So we're starting with a record lookup so that when we send this form to the contact, we get the contact's details directly into the form. And we can also look up related data about the contact, and all of my screens are over here because I like to organize things where my screens are in one place and I can quickly and easily see what the user's point of view is going to be for the flow. Now the key thing on the record lookup is that contact ID and figuring out who it is, whose data we're going to provide and update through the flow. So I've got this ID field from my contact that's being set to a variable called this contact ID. Where am I going to get this data from? That's the question. And with Visualforce and Flow combined, I can really easily serve up my flow in a web page and pass it data from the context that it's being used in. So I can pass it parameters, whether it's being used from a button on a record detail page in Salesforce Classic, or maybe it's embedded directly into a record detail page in the Lightning experience. In this case, I'm going to pass it as a parameter in an email message that we'll take a look at the end. But some of the key things to make this flow work in Visualforce, it's just 7 lines of code. And the first two, or well, the first one and the last one are basically out of the box. When you click new Visualforce, that's kind of what you get. You get the opening Apex page tag and the closing Apex page tag. So the really interesting part is the 3 lines in between. This will be unique for every flow that you want to serve up in a Visualforce page. In this case, we're using a flow called sample form working copy. It's an active flow, and I have a little bit of control over how that looks. I'm telling it to put the buttons only at the bottom of the flow. And once the flow is completed, I want to go to a Visualforce page that is named Thank You. It's a basic thank you screen. Now, we talked just a moment ago about the variable called this contact ID, and I want to give you a little bit more details about how that works in our Visualforce page. You can see within the flow that it's a text data type. IDs, of course, are text. And the input-output type is input only, because we're going to be passing data into that contact ID variable, but we're not going to actually pass that data out to any other Apex or other flows or connected logic. So back at our Visualforce page, we can see the Apex parameter line is referencing our variable, this contact ID, that we set up in our flow. So this name is going to correspond to the name of some parameter in our flow, some input variable. We could have multiple lines like this. We can pass multiple values. But in this case, we're just passing the contact ID. Now, how does the Visualforce page know what the contact ID is? Well, it knows because we've got the standard controller of contact assigned to this particular Visualforce page. So that means whenever it sees contact, or really exclamation point contact, it knows to bind to data in the Salesforce database in the contact object. And we're using the dot notation that you use all the time in formulas, so contact.id. I expect you're probably at least a little bit familiar with that from formulas. There's one more line I want to add to my Visualforce page, and that's new in the last release or two. The Apex, some people just say SLIDS or SLDS, Salesforce Lightning Design System. This gives us a little bit of styling and makes our Visualforce page look a little bit more modern. When you use this with Flow, and you turn on the beta feature for flows using the Lightning Design System, you really get better looking flows all the way around. If you do turn on the Salesforce Lightning Design System in a Visualforce page that has flow, you should also turn off the headers, so show header equals false, turn off the sidebar, so sidebar equals false. Those are both related to our Salesforce Classic, that header at the top where we see our logo from our release, and the sidebar is the bit on the side that lets us have access to recent records. And then lastly, we want to turn off the standard style sheet, because the standard style sheet gives us that Salesforce Classic look and feel, the fonts and the basic layouts. So we turn all of that off when we turn on the Salesforce Lightning Design System in our Apex pages. Now, once we've got the Visualforce page set up and the flow set up, we need to just make sure that we have the permission sets for our unauthenticated guest user, because the guest user is a single username that logs in automatically when someone clicks on these unauthenticated pages. So to Salesforce, it looks like the same person every time, and in this case the person's name would be portal site guest user, even though it's hundreds, thousands, whatever, of different individuals who are creating that data. And I've got a permission set assigned so that I can make sure that all of the Visualforce pages, all of any Apex supporting code, all of the custom objects and custom fields, all of that information is here in the permission set, so that I can make sure that my portal or guest user can access the flow and run it. Now, the last piece of the puzzle here is the email template. Now, I'm using a standard Salesforce Classic email template here just because I want to call your attention to what the URL looks like. In this case, the URL is simply, the first part is simply the name or the address of the site, Force.com site that we set up, and I'm forcing it to go to the particular form that I want it to bring up when it launches. Then I've got the question mark that actually is where I pass the parameters. So this is how I give the context to my Visualforce page of which contact we're working with. And of course, this is our simple mail merge that you've used in Salesforce email templates previously, I'm sure. And so we've got our contact first name up here in the beginning of the email, and we can use our contact ID merge field here following the name of the parameter, and the name of the parameter is ID. That's how Visualforce is going to look for it, as contact.id. And of course we sign it with the username. I can give you a quick look at what that email looks like for the user. In this case, it's pretty ugly. I probably would want to bury this link so that it's really probably highlighting this sentence and making that sentence a link, or using using Visualforce templates instead of this Salesforce Classic template to do something like put an image that they can click on. And when they do click on it, in this case, if you've got a developer org, you've probably seen Barbara Levy, and so when she gets the email, she's going to be able to pull it up. And this is using the new Salesforce Lightning Design System layout. We can pull specific data related to her record, and she can update it or confirm or go to a different list. And one of the really nice things about the Lightning Design System is it's responsive. So in this case, we've made our form a little bit more complex, and we're showing how it would look on a mobile device, because in fact, the nonprofit is expecting that these trainees are actually going to be receiving the email on their cell phone and replying on their cell phone as well. We've added a little bit more data to our Visualforce page, pulling up their existing qualifications and any recent job postings related to those qualifications that there might be. So they have the opportunity to go ahead and change their qualifications, adding to the description or the years of experience, or adding new ones on the fly. And I wanted to give you a quick peek just so that you could see how much control you really get with styling your flow. This is a flow that I did several years ago for Dreamforce. I basically replaced my entire slideshow with a flow and made it completely responsive to where the user is in the process. So we show videos of what steps they're learning about as they learn about flow. And when we click on the next screen, we get a different video that's specific to this step. So you have a lot of control between the visual flow and the flow itself, passing information back and forth. The flow can update what the Visualforce page looks like, and the Visualforce page can pass information back to the flow only in that very first section where it kicks off. So in that parameter, for example. And that is the beauty of using flow to survey customers, clients, leads, and do it in a way that can be done strictly native Salesforce features and no extra expenses on top of what you're already doing. I'm going to switch back to my slideshow, which I think is going to just show us a thank you screen. Basically, so our solution is to combine visual workflow with Visualforce and Force.com sites, because the visual workflow gives us those easy to maintain flows, forms, so that administrator has complete control over making the form match what our business needs are and changing them on the fly as necessary. We use the Visualforce, I don't know what happened to my slideshow. We use the Visualforce, there we go, to pass the IDs or other parameters directly into the flow, and we use Force.com's sites to make those Visualforce pages available to unauthenticated web users, so that they can, anyone on our website can access the data, or anyone receiving an email can access their specific data. Now, one of the things with that is that we warn our email recipients that the Force.com sites are not secure. So if you share your link, you're sharing your personal data. And that's my only, that's pretty much the only downside to using the Force.com sites, is the lack of logins. But of course, you could put it all in a community to solve that problem. And now, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or try to.
Okay, we're going to give people a few minutes to type their questions in, but we did get one through the success community earlier on. So we have a process builder that has time-based actions, and I recently received error log emails that the process failed because the user that triggered the process is no longer active when the time-based action fired. Are there any workarounds for this issue? Thanks.
I'll take a stab at that. I have a question, actually. I saw that when it popped up. So they specifically say that the user is no longer active, which to me means that the user is not a person who's continued to be employed at the company. So I would say that you need to update the records associated with that user and change the ownership so that the data can be updated by other people as necessary. That would be my guess, but it could be that something else is going on. So I'm anxious to hear what other people have to say about what might be happening there.
I have not actually had that happen, so I don't know, David or Rakesh, if you have any experience with that. No? All right. Oh, we have a question. What are the common expansions required where the Flow Visualforce site combo cannot meet the need?
Common expansions requested where the I haven't encountered any request where Flow, Visualforce, and sites could not meet basic survey needs personally, because if you can build it in Salesforce, you can access it with Flow for the most part. Unauthenticated site users don't have the ability to directly edit data like contacts. So in fact, some of that contact data, some of the standard fields can't be edited, and so you can edit related data, or you can basically have the Flow access a trigger that would then be able to update. So at some point you might need to add a little bit of Apex to accomplish what you need if you need to edit some of these objects or fields that your unauthenticated guest user doesn't directly have access to. You can put that data into sort of a holding object and then use Apex to automatically go in via a trigger and make the appropriate changes in the system context rather than the specific user context. But yeah, that's about the only limitation I can think of. And in that case, the expansion that you need is a little bit of Apex code. Yes, if you can imagine it, Bonnie can build it. Sure, I'll take that challenge.
Okay, so the next question is from Rick. Do you have to enable field permissions for the guest user for field updates to occur through the flow process?
Absolutely. So we looked briefly at assigning that site guest user to a permission, or assigning a permission set to that site guest user. So the permission set has all of those access permissions granted that are available for custom objects and custom fields for the guest user to make those updates.
And Samantha has a question. Do you need a special license type for the guest user?
Everything I showed today, including this site guest user, is completely, I like to say free, but really it's already paid for. It's stuff you've already bought when you pay for your Salesforce org, Enterprise and above. You have the ability to create these Force.com sites, and Force.com sites automatically support the unauthenticated user, which you get one user per site. So if you've got a site that you want to have access to a certain set of data and a different site that you want to have access to a different set of data, you would just set up multiple sites and control who accesses those sites by who you share the link with or other means. So no, there is no cost. There is no, the license, the special license comes automatically as a guest license when you create that Force.com site. So yes, you need it, but no, it's not an added expense or any effort on your part beyond setting up the Force.com site.
All right, any other questions that could be related to Bonnie's presentation or a general process automation question? I'll give folks a few minutes to type away.
I feel like I must have had too much coffee today and did my presentation in like a quarter of the time from our run through.
So while we wait, Bonnie, you mentioned the Rad Women program. If there are those out there who are interested in joining, how would they best go about that?
Well, if you look for Rad Women in the success community, that is the best place to look for help in general, in my opinion, going to the success community. So go to the success community, look for the Rad Women various groups, and join the group to get updates about when the program starts. They try to do 2 times a year, certainly do at least 1 time a year. They just finished a cohort of beginning learners, and I think they're going to try to launch an intermediate class later this year. So there's a lot of things happening around there.
Oh, another question. where can you do the same thing in flows or process builder? How do you choose?
Well, that's a good
When can you
question.
do the same thing?
um, I'm a longtime fan of flow, and just as a matter of practice, I try to do as much in flow as possible rather than process builder, because flow has a lot more control over logic, and it just is more flexible that way. I personally like to also put the automation as close to the point of data entry as possible. So if I'm automating a process around what users do, I prefer flow because I want to give them the right user experience, and not, it's very frustrating for users to have to fill in data that gets thrown away. For example, if you use Process Builder to rename your opportunities so that they follow a best practice opportunity naming scheme, if you do that, your users have spent their time typing in something that you throw away. And that's not fair. That's just an unpleasant experience for an end user to see that happening over and over again. So you can eliminate that problem by putting those sorts of processes or those sorts of automations into a visual flow rather than a process builder, into something that interacts directly with the user instead of working behind the user's back. Process builder, on the other hand, is really great for data integrations. Obviously, flow is going to have a harder time with that because it would need to be fired off by a process, or it would need to be initiated by an administrator or someone who's actually importing data to make sure that it runs. And process builder just generally for handling data that's coming in through an integration, where if the data is coming in automatically, the response can be automatic, basically, and hidden. That's how I choose, but I'm interested to hear if people have other ideas and other ways of breaking down which is the best in which scenarios.
Oh, Stuart. Okay. I've been reading about people who are moving all of their process builders for one object into a single process. Is this good, bad, or indifferent?
Generally speaking, the simpler it is to have insight into what your org is doing, the better. So if you've got a handful of processes that are running on a single object, affecting how a single object works, it's much more difficult to come in as a brand new administrator, for example, or even an experienced administrator in some cases, and know exactly what's happening in what order, and what the big picture is around those automations. So it's harder to really get your head around what's going on in your org if you've got 5 different places to look and you've got to figure out why one comes before the other. If you've got them all in a single process where you're evaluating conditions to determine which automation should kick off in response to your data, it's hopefully a little easier to figure out what's going on because you have that one location to look at and say, hey, how do we decide what goes first? How do we know what's happening and when it's happening? So yeah, a single process. It's like the old trigger rule, and frequently people are told that if you're doing custom trigger development, try to stick to one trigger per object so that you know what's going on and in what order. And you can just look in one place and go, oh, hey, we're doing all this stuff to our data.
Yeah, so to your point, process builders they run at random. You can't really control it, but if you do have them consolidated into one process, you could control the order of valuation.
Yes, and let's see, Corey also asked about workflow versus process builder, and workflow, likewise, you can't predict the order. So if you've got multiple workflow rules related to a single object, they could conflict with each other or cause errors ultimately in the data if they fire in a different order from one experience to the next. So in general, if you can move to the process builder, you can have more flexibility to understand what's going on and to see into what your org is doing.
And then Toya had a question, how do you document your flows?
Well, that's a whole nother session. But I wrote a blog post a while back about using packages to remove triggers that are custom code that you want to deactivate or delete from your org, from production. And it uses something called packages that a lot of people who aren't developers at all, and even developers who aren't ISVs don't necessarily know about. But in your org, you can create a package. And yes, ISVs, those software vendors that have third-party apps, they use that feature to create those managed packages and unmanaged packages that you see on the App Exchange. But you can use that feature to create a package that doesn't ever go on the App Exchange. So the great thing about that is you can put your flow into a package, and then you can use Workbench to download that package. And I talk about in my blog how to use Workbench to download packages and re-upload packages. And when you have it downloaded, you've got that description of your flow. It's in XML, but you can work with that to generate documentation automatically.
Tamar had a question. I recently migrated a workflow verbatim into the process node, and after the migration, I have one validation rule that is not triggered with the workflow and is triggered with the process. Why would that be?
Sorry, I was trying to find the written version of that question. I'm lost.
Tamar?
I gotta see it. This is Tamara. There it is. Node and after the migration of validation. That's real. I think that would require a really close look at kind of what your workflow does and what your process does, because of course you say verbatim, but they're very different user interfaces, so there's no such thing as verbatim. You did your best to replicate it using the exact words wherever they were available to you, I'm sure, but because they're very different technologies, that might not even have been the right thing to do, going verbatim. So without knowing really in specific details what's going on, it's hard to say. I think the trick is, how do you debug it? And so you've got this working one way in workflow and a different way in your process. Since you're moving from workflow to process, then you really want to debug the process. So in the sandbox, I would try to experiment with the data and see at what points it fails and at what points it succeeds in doing what it needs to do, and then see if you can simplify your process as part of your testing to make sure that you can have it do what you need it to do, that thing that it's currently failing to do, like find a way to make that happen using smaller processes that are aimed directly at that rather than the more elaborate process. It's easier to debug the smaller part of the problem rather than 1,000 things at once, if that makes sense.
So I remember Doug Ayers mentioned on a recent post somewhere around process scheduled actions don't trigger validation rules. So I just went and looked through the documentation, and in addition to scheduled actions and process builders, also record updates on workflow rules do not trigger validation rules. So that would be, in that specific scenario, that would be the reason why validation rule is not catching on the workflow rule, but it is catching on the process builder. But as mentioned, they're written kind of differently, so there's definitely the chance that it's not going to be a verbatim copy over on the workflow.
All right, last call for questions. I think we answered all of them that were out there. And Bonnie, if you wanted to send me the URL to the blog post that you referenced, I can include that in our posting.
Okay, I think I just posted it as a question in, I don't know. I tried to post it in the chat window, so I'm not sure where it went. Did you receive it?
You posted it in the question section?
I did. Oh, here, let's try it again. There, I put it in chat.
Got it.
I have no idea what happened to the question.
All right, we'll make sure it's in the blog post.
Okay. And the comments have a step-by-step, a link to a step-by-step on using Workbench with packages.
Okay, excellent. All right, that seems about it. Again, thank you so much, Bonnie, for spending time with us on Automation Hour. And folks on the phone, we will talk to you in 2 weeks. Happy Friday, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.